Hello and welcome to Real Obscure. My name is Kevin H. Shaw, and in tonight's episode we're off on a perilous adventure, accompanied by a cyborg, a scientist, a robot, a ninja, and a bloke with a boat. From 1986, it's the greatest comic book movie not based on a comic book ever made, Eliminators. Eliminators was produced by Charles Band. He's a writer, director and producer who, to this day, is still a powerhouse in movie production. When the movies from his first company, Charles Band International Productions, which included Tourist Trap, Laser Blast and Metal Storm, The Destruction of Jared Sin, failed to receive the promotion and distribution he'd hoped for, he formed a new company, Empire Pictures, in 1983. Signing with Vestron Video, Empire began producing small independent horror and sci-fi movies, targeting both movie theatres and, more importantly, the booming VHS rental market. Now, for those of you who weren't around back in the heyday of home rentals, the way we watched movies at home was very different to the way we do today. We had no streaming services and we didn't even have the internet. You'd go to the video store and simply pick out what you wanted to rent. 90% of your movie choices were based on the title and cover art alone, and we didn't have any way of knowing if the movie was good or terrible. All we had to go on was the blurb on the back, which would of course exclaim it was Star Wars meets Indiana Jones, or the most terrifying thing since The Exorcist. A claim virtually every horror movie made back then. But one thing you could always guarantee is if that you saw the Empire logo on a video's packaging, then you were in for a good time. When their movie Ghoulies, which was one of the many small creatures go on a rampage movies that came out after Gremlins, became an unexpected hit, the company quickly expanded, at one point producing 2 movies a month to feed the ever-growing demand for new movies that were ideal for both theatrical and then later home rentals. Back then, video rental stores depended on having a large selection to choose from, and so the more movies they could have on the shelf, the more they could rent out. And remember, this wasn't like streaming where multiple people could watch the same movie. No, if you wanted to watch Evil Speak, The Burning, or The Evil Dead, then you would have to have the physical tape, which of course meant nobody else could rent it until you returned it. As Empire films were cheap and numerous, it made them ideal for video rental stores. And to add another detail that you may not know, but back then, before Blockbuster and Hollywood Video homogenized the industry, we'd rent movies from independent mom-and-pop rental places, with even gas stations or local grocery stores having a rack or two of rentals available, selected by the store's owner rather than via corporate edict. Empire tapped into this market and quickly created a massive back catalogue of movies that were also cheap to buy. Yes, the rental places had to buy their stock, usually at around $300 per tape in today's money, and also focusing on titles that would be eye-catching and desirable. This even included creating what we now term mockbusters, where they take inspiration from another bigger movie and, well, borrow some ideas from it. So if you couldn't rent that copy of Goonies or Gremlins, well, according to your dad, Ghoulies sounded close enough, and maybe it was the best bits of both movies in one. Empire had a huge run of hits as both Empire Pictures and their subsidy Urban Classics, including fondly remembered titles such as Reanimator, The Dungeon Master, From Beyond, Zone Troopers, Intruder, Slave Girls from Beyond Infinity, Terrorvision, the Trancers series, Sorority Babes in the Slimeball Bowler Armour, Dolls, Ghoulies and its sequels, Creepazoids, Catacombs, Arena, Robojocks, and tonight's feature, Eliminators. Sadly, Empire overstretched themselves, and in 1988 they filed for bankruptcy. However, Charles Band began a new endeavour in the form of Full Moon Productions later that year, and to this day continues to produce the same kind of horror, sci-fi and adventure movies that made Empire Pictures such a success. At the time of recording, Charles Band has over 470 credits for movie production and is still going strong. The movie was directed by Peter Manoogian, a director who worked extensively for Empire Pictures and whose films include a segment in The Dungeon Master, Arena and Demonic Toys. More recently he's moved into British TV work, acting as an AD on episodes of EastEnders, Doctors and Holby City. Anyway, we'll discuss the movie's writers and the cast a little later, as I know you're all dying to get into the action. So what's it all about? The movie opens with its title sequence and theme, which includes a still of the cybernetic face of the Mandroid, complete with glowing red eye and stoic expression. He's played by Patrick Reynolds, an actor whose resume mostly consists of TV guest roles, but who is most famous as an anti-smoking advocate. Over this are imposed images of him piloting a crashing plane in his pre-Mandroid form, combined with flashes of light and Roman centurions running in terror. We cut to the interior of a laboratory, where Abbott Reeves and his assistant, Dr. Takada, have just completed a time travel experiment, hence the Romans, in which the Mandroid has returned from the past. Abbott Reeves, that's his name, he's not a member of the clergy, is played by Roy Dotrice. A member of the Royal Shakespeare Company, Dotrice had a career that spanned stage, television, radio and cinema. He's probably best known to genre fans for his appearances in Space 1999 and the Ron Perlman-Linda Hamilton romantasy series Beauty and the Beast, in which he played Vincent's father. One of his final roles was in Game of Thrones as the pyromancer Hallyne, and he also narrated the Song of Ice and Fire audiobooks. His assistant, Dr. Takada, is played by Tadashi Horino. His previous roles include appearances in the Kentucky Fried Movie, Galaxina, Red Sonja, Bill and Ted's Bogus Journey, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 3 and Mulholland Drive. Their time travel experiments a success, Takada speaks with the Mandroid, who we learn is an amnesiac whose memories are limited to that of the aforementioned plane crash that almost cost him his life and led to him being transformed into a cyborg. Reeves later informs Takada that the Mandroid has served his purpose and commands him to take him to be destroyed. Takada, however, has formed a friendship with the Mandroid and arranges for him to escape. When Takada meets with the Mandroid that night, his escape is interrupted by Reeves's men. Reeves commands the Mandroid to kill his friend, but he overcomes his programming and instead turns on Reeves's henchmen. Takada, however, is killed, but with his dying breath, he tells the Mandroid to seek out Colonel Hunter. And it's at this point we're introduced to the Mandroid's mobile unit, which is utterly awesome. Essentially, when he docks with this thing, by removing his cybernetic legs, he becomes a mecha centaur, with his upper body bonding with a tank-like vehicle that gives him increased speed and mobility. And it's an absolutely fantastic physical prop. Yes, instead of opting for a model or some kind of small-scale effect, the effects company went with a full-size tracked and fully functional vehicle. It's a really impressive piece of fabrication and one of the highlights of the movies, as it works, allowing him to traverse a variety of terrains, and it really gives him a presence. For such a prop in a low-budget movie, it is incredibly impressive. Anyway, docked with his mobile unit, the Mandroid makes good his escape, mowing down henchmen with his laser arm, which he then switches out for his rocket launcher arm to blow a hole in the compound's perimeter wall. Seriously, why there was never a Mandroid action figure with switchable accessory-laden limbs and a mobile unit, I don't know. But the whole scene is an absolute joy to watch if you're a fan of physical effects and pew-pew lasers. We're then introduced to Colonel Nora Hunter, played by Denise Crosby. The granddaughter of Bing Crosby, she dropped out of acting school when a local journalist published a scathing attack on her for being what we'd now call a nepo baby. She later said she rebelled against her family image by appearing nude in Playboy in 1979 before returning to acting, appearing in minor roles in such movies as 10, 48 Hours, and both The Trail and The Curse of the Pink Panther. But I'm sure you all know her from her role as Tasha Yar in Star Trek The Next Generation, which proved to be her breakout role shortly after the release of Eliminators. She went on to appear in the 1989 adaptation of Pet Sematary, Deep Impact, and a number of TV roles, including appearances in The X-Files, Dexter, and The Walking Dead. A robotics engineer, Colonel Hunter is working late at night on her latest project, Spot, a small robot that is capable of matter transference, which sees it transform into a glowing sphere and then zip around at high speeds. Spot, which is an acronym for something that I can't remember, is the archetypal 1980s cute robot, owing a lot to Vincent from The Black Hole and Nintendo's Rob. And again, were this movie released today, we'd all have a little toy Spot, complete with LED display and bleeping sound effects. When the Mandroid breaks into her lab, Nora recognises his prosthetics as her robotics work, and when Mandroid mentions Reeves, she explains she is funded by the Reeves Foundation and that he died some years ago. But when the Mandroid tells her that he is still alive and in Mexico and prolonging his life with transplants and technology, Hunter agrees to accompany the Mandroid, and, after doing some repairs and removing much of his robotic programming, the two depart, with Spot in tow. They arrive in Mexico in search of a river guide. Nora enters a bar and declares she's looking for the toughest guy in the cantina, and then departs to await the winner, at which point a fight breaks out, with Harry Fontana emerging victorious. Although, unbeknownst to Hunter, he actually sat the fight out before finishing off the winner, Bayou Betty, with a bottle to the head. Fontana is played by Andrew Prine. A staple of Western TV shows in the 60s, he transitioned into horror movies in the 70s, appearing in Simon, King of the Witches, Hannah, Queen of the Vampires, the original The Town That Dreaded Sundown, and The Evil. He continued to act in a series of movies and television shows, and appeared along with so many other horror icons in 2012's Lords of Salem. Convinced that they're treasure hunters, Fontana agrees to guide them to their destination in return for a share of the loot. The trio, after a series of run-ins with Bayou Betty, Reeves's henchman Ray, and a group of time-displaced Neanderthals, are joined by Kuji, a martial arts expert and the son of Dr. Takada. Kuji is played by Conan Lee, a martial artist and actor who appeared in a number of genre movies, including Jim Carter, Tiger on Beat and its sequel, Lethal Weapon 4, and Big Trouble in Little China. And he was also the fight coordinator on this movie. Will the group be able to stop Reeves's plan? Will the Mandroid recover his memories? And will Kuji ever be able to stand in a normal pose that isn't a fighting stance? Well, let's find out as we head into the spoiler zone. So our heroes launch their assault on Reeves's lair, with the Mandroid calling him out while the others sneak into the complex using a schematic provided by Spot, who sadly Kuji was forced to destroy when Reeves reprogrammed him to attack the group. They discover Reeves's plan is to travel back in time and, using his superior future technology, become the head of the Roman Empire. but before they can stop him, they're captured, and when the mandroid continues to call out Reeves, he arrives, revealing he has built himself a suit of power armour equipped with all manner of weapons and technologies. Defeating the mandroid with his superior firepower, he leaves Nora, Harry and Kuji encased in a shrinking sphere of energy to prepare for his journey back in time. The mandroid, summoning the last of his strength, crawls to his friends and absorbs the energy from the sphere, freeing the trio, but dying in the process. They chase Reeves to his lair, but arrive too late. He's made it to his time sphere and is winging his way back to 12 BC. Hunter attempts to override the programming but discovers she cannot do it fast enough to stop Reeves. In a moment of frustration, Fontana bashes one of the computer keyboards, which causes the time sphere to malfunction, sending Reeves back to the Silurian era as Nora announces, "Abbott Reeves is the ruler of nothing." Reeves emerges from his now damaged time machine triumphantly, only for his victory to turn sour when he realises he is trapped in the prehistoric past. We cut to our heroes one last time and the trio laugh as the movie ends on a classic 80s freeze frame. As I mentioned earlier, Eliminators is one of a slew of movies Empire Pictures produced during their golden age of home video releases. It's a movie a lot of people may not remember the title of, but they certainly remember fondly, particularly when you see the mandroid piloting his mobile unit, as it's one of those images that is burned into the memory of people of a certain age. Now, the screenplay was written by Paul DeMeo and Danny Bilson, who would go on to adapt the Rocketeer comic book for the criminally underrated Disney movie of 1991. Their other credits include TV action shows Viper, The Sentinel, and the first TV adaptation of DC's The Flash, along with an adaptation of another DC project in the form of the Human Target TV show. During their time working with Charles Band, they also created the Trancers series, Arena, which was also directed by Eliminators' Peter Manoogian, and Zone Troopers. Now, these guys absolutely nail it with the movie's script. It's a bizarre mashup of every pulp and comic book idea you can think of, all served up in a gloriously ridiculous, although at times very self-knowing fashion, and it just keeps piling on the layers. It's like watching a kid playing with their toys.
This is a robot and he's going to fight a ninja man, and then a supervillain shows up, and then they get on a boat, and then the man chases them, and then they get on motorbikes, and then another robot man fights, and then all the supervillain shoots lasers into the man, and then they all shoot, and then everything explodes. The end.
Now, the one thing I really do think that they did miss out on this is the limited use of time travel. I'd have loved to see Reeves's fortress protected by a group of Spartans, or samurai, or whatever else they had in the costume department at hand, as his guards are essentially hillbillies in plaid. I do think that was a real missed opportunity to turn the weirdness up to 11 by throwing just something else into the mix. And, okay, so there's very little in the way of character development. The mandroid, despite finding a photograph of his forgotten wife and child, doesn't ever solve the mystery of who he is, and when he dies, it's a sort of "and then he dies" moment that's very much, he died to save us. Anyway, Harry Fontana is probably the most interesting of the bunch. He's one of those characters who prefers to use slyness and cunning rather than his fists. He's a cheating, roguish scoundrel, and I think he's intended to be the movie's Han Solo. So he's a shady, self-interested character who you're never sure if you can trust, and whose allegiance is to himself and profit, but by the end of the movie undergoes a little bit of a transformation into a more heroic type. There's a hint of romance between Hunter and Fontana, and even a brief suggestion that she may be developing feelings for the mandroid, but that never really goes anywhere, being played more for that it's Fontana's scheming, slimy machinations that lead to their kissing more than any kind of real attraction, or at least any that's explored in detail. And Koji is there to do kung fu, somersault around, and generally stand like he's looking ready for a fight, with lots of sharp movements. But honestly, that isn't what this movie is about. It's about pew pew lasers, explosions, cool robots, kung fu, and people being blasted around in slow motion. It's sci-fi comic book adventure bollocks at its purest and most unashamedly pulpy. And I love it. Now, I'm sure part of the movie's appeal is its nostalgia value. When I first came across this movie, I was out of work, having just left school and trying to find something I could do without any actual experience. I'd spend a lot of my free time, which I actually had a lot of, seeing as nobody wanted to hire a long-haired goth with a penchant for leather jackets and piercings, so I'd watch movies, and there was a fantastic cheap video store within walking distance of my house, so I'd rent movies almost every day. I learned early on to keep an eye out for releases from Empire Pictures and later Full Moon, as they were exactly the kind of pulpy B-movie horror and sci-fi movies I loved. And so when I saw the cover for this movie, featuring the Mandroid blasting his arm cannon as he rode on his mobile unit, I knew I had to see it. And I'm sure many of you had similar experiences. The Friday night highlight of going to the video store and being allowed to pick out a movie for you and your brother, accompanied by pizza and a late night. Or the sleepover where your friend rented a copy and you stayed up watching it as you scarfed down popcorn while everybody else was asleep on the couch. Such experiences can shape our memory of a movie, and it's one of the greatest disappointments in adult life to revisit something from your childhood that you loved, only to discover it isn't as fantastic as you remember it being, and, well, if you're being honest, it's actually kind of crappy and embarrassing. I'm pleased to say though that Eliminators is not one of those things. Yes, it's cheesy and goofy, but it's intentionally so. It's pure, pulpy sci-fi action at its best, gathering all the elements of Star Wars, comic books and Saturday morning cartoons and serving it up in a great steaming bowl of sheer, unadulterated joy. The movie's pacing is great, even if they do spend a lot of time whizzing around on speedboats. Although keep in mind these are all physical stunts, and yes, they really are piloting the boats at those speeds and jumping from them. The physical props for the Mandroid and his mobile unit are more impressive than half of modern designs I see, and while it's not exactly what you call a character piece, it gives enough of each character to know what they're there to do. Despite its problems, it's still just a fantastically entertaining piece of sci-fi action. I'd tell you to seek out a copy of Eliminators, but for that you're gonna need to cough up close to $100. Because if the DVD and Blu-ray pricing are anything to go by, this is a movie that holds a special place in the hearts of many, many movie fans. But if you do get to see it, you will totally see why. This is just a gloriously joyful, stupid, brilliant, nonsensical excuse for a movie that evokes everything from 80s toys, G.I. Joe comics, and the classic Republic serials. I love every minute of it, and I know if you were lucky enough to see this movie too, then you probably sat listening to this with a huge smile on your face, because you too will remember just how freaking awesome this movie is. And on that note, thanks for listening, and I'll see you all on the next episode of Real Obscure. This episode of Real Obscure was written, produced and enhanced with cybernetic parts by me, Kevin H. Shaw. If you enjoyed the show and would like to help it reach a wider audience, then please like, share and comment. To keep up to date with future releases, please remember to subscribe and turn notifications on, as that way you'll never miss another episode. You can learn more about Real Obscure by visiting realobscurepod.com, and if you'd like to share your thoughts on the show, you can do so by emailing hellorealobscure@gmail.com. I'm also on Blue Sky using the handle @realobscurepod. And if you're watching on YouTube and would like to help support Real Obscure financially, then please feel free to make a one-time donation using the thanks option. Eliminators is copyright 1986. All content here is used for educational and commentary purposes under Section 107 of the Copyright Act, Fair Use, and remains the property of the respective copyright holders. Presented here for the purposes of critique, commentary, and discussion. No copyright infringement is intended. So please, don't sue me or send me back to the Silurian age.